quiet kid terrorized by bullies. They had no idea he was an MMA champion. Oliver Chen stood frozen in the middle of Westlake High's bustling cafeteria, chocolate milk dripping from his hair and down his face, staining his new white shirt. Laughter erupted around him like a wave, the sound seeming to bounce off every wall and corner. At 15, Oliver was used to being invisible, not a spectacle, but that had changed the moment he'd walked through Westlake's doors 3 weeks ago. "Sorry, new kid. Didn't see you there," sneered Jackson Miller, the ringleader of the group that had been making Oliver's life miserable since day one. At 17, Jackson was tall and imposing, the star quarterback with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that charmed teachers but terrified underclassmen. Behind him stood his faithful sidekicks, Damon Pierce, a hulking junior with a buzz cut, who seemed to communicate mostly in grunts, and Tyler Evans, a wiry basketball player with a perpetual smirk. Oliver slowly wiped the milk from his eyes, his round face revealing no emotion. The cafeteria continued to buzz with laughter and whispers. "Don't react. Just like Sifu taught you, control your breathing, control your emotions." His thoughts drifted to the dojo where he'd spent the last 7 years training, earning his black belt in karate by 12 and becoming the youngest regional mixed martial arts champion in California last summer. Nobody at Westlake knew about that part of his life. To them, he was just the chubby Asian kid who'd moved from San Francisco mid-semester, an easy target. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" Jackson taunted, stepping closer. His breath smelled like the pizza they were serving today. "Or maybe you don't speak English well enough to understand me?" Oliver felt heat rising to his face at the racist comment, but kept his expression neutral. He'd promised his parents he wouldn't get into fights at his new school. After the incident, at his old school, where he'd broken the arm of a bully who'd pushed things too far, his parents had made him swear. One more incident, and they'd pull him from competitions. Fighting was for the ring, not for school. "I understand perfectly," Oliver said quietly, grabbing a napkin from a nearby table. "And I also understand that you must have coordination problems. You should get that checked." Jackson's face darkened. "What did you just say to me, Tubby?" Miss Rodriguez, the young English teacher on lunch duty, finally noticed the commotion and walked over. "Is everything all right here?" "Everything's fine, Miss Rodriguez," Jackson said, instantly transforming his expression into one of innocent concern. "Oliver just had a little accident with his milk. I was offering to help clean up." Miss Rodriguez looked skeptical but didn't press further. "Oliver, why don't you go get cleaned up in the bathroom? I can write you a pass if you're late to your next class." Oliver nodded and turned to leave, the squelch of his wet shoes accompanying him as he walked across the cafeteria. Behind him, he heard Jackson's voice, barely above a whisper, but clear enough. "This isn't over, Chen." The bathroom mirror reflected a boy Oliver barely recognized anymore. In San Francisco, at his old school and at the dojo, he'd walked with confidence. Here, his shoulders hunched forward, his eyes constantly darted around looking for threats, and his face remained carefully blank to hide any emotion that might be used against him. He splashed water on his face and tried to clean his shirt as best he could. 3 months. Just 3 more months until the end of the school year, and maybe Mom and Dad will let me go back to my old school for senior year. The bathroom door banged open, and Oliver tensed, expecting Jackson and his crew, but it was just a freshman he didn't recognize. The younger boy gave him a curious look, but said nothing. Oliver finished cleaning up and headed to his next class, keeping his head down and moving quickly through the hallways of Westlake High. The building was only 10 years old, all gleaming. Modern architecture with wide windows and brightly colored lockers, but to Oliver, it felt like a prison, or maybe a jungle, with predators lurking around every corner. The rest of the day passed without incident, though Oliver caught Jackson and his friends watching him in the hallway between classes, whispering and laughing. In history class, someone flicked paper balls at the back of his head when Mr. Wilson wasn't looking. In gym, he was the last one picked for basketball teams, despite being quick on his feet. He deliberately played poorly, missing easy shots and fumbling passes. The last thing he needed was to stand out for being athletic. When the final bell rang, Oliver felt the familiar rush of relief, freedom, at least until tomorrow. He hurried to his locker, hoping to get out before Jackson and his crew could find him. No such luck. "Hey, Chen," Jackson's voice boomed down the hallway. "Waiting for you by the bike racks. Don't keep us waiting." Oliver pretended not to hear, but his heart raced. The bike racks were at the east entrance, but there was another exit on the west side of the building. He'd have to take the long way home, but it was better than whatever Jackson had planned. Clutching his backpack, Oliver headed for the west exit. weaving through groups of students eager to start their weekend. He was almost to the doors when he felt a hand grab his shoulder. Going somewhere? It was Damon, Jackson's mountain of a friend. Jackson wants to talk to you. Before Oliver could respond, Damon's grip tightened painfully, and he found himself being steered toward the east exit. Students parted to let them through, some watching with concern, others with sick anticipation, but no one stepped in to help. Breathe. Center yourself. You could break his hold in 3 different ways right now, but then what? You promised Mom and Dad. At the bike racks, Jackson and Tyler were waiting. The area was secluded from the main entrance, partially hidden by a row of pine trees planted to beautify the school grounds. Few teachers patrolled this area after school. There he is, our favorite new student, Jackson said with a cold smile. We didn't get to finish our conversation at lunch. Oliver kept his face expressionless. I have to get home. This won't take long, Jackson said, stepping closer. He was at least 5 inches taller than Oliver. You disrespected me in the cafeteria today, in front of everyone. You spilled milk on me, Oliver said quietly. I'd say we're even. Tyler laughed. He's got a mouth on him after all. Jackson's smile disappeared. Here's the thing, Chen, I run this school. New kids, especially ones who look like you, need to understand their place. And your place is at the bottom. Oliver felt the familiar heat of anger rising in his chest, the same anger that had gotten him in trouble at his last school. He forced it down, remembering his Sifu's words. Anger clouds judgment. The mind must be clear like still water to reflect the opponent's weakness. I don't want trouble, Oliver said, his voice steadier than he felt. Should have thought of that before you came to my school, Jackson replied, then nodded to Damon, who shoved Oliver hard against the bike rack. The metal cut into his back, and his backpack fell to the ground. We're going to make something very clear, Jackson continued, picking up Oliver's backpack and unzipping it. He began pulling out books and papers, dropping them onto the damp ground. Every day you're going to bring us something. Maybe your lunch money, maybe you'll do our homework, maybe... Stop. The word came out before Oliver could stop it. Jackson paused, a dangerous gleam in his eyes. What did you say? I said stop. Oliver straightened up, his hands at his sides. Not in fists, not yet, but ready. The 3 bullies exchanged glances, momentarily surprised by the sudden change in their victim's demeanor. Then Jackson laughed. Or what? You'll cry to the teachers? To your mommy? He took Oliver's history textbook and tossed it to Tyler. Maybe we should show Chen what happens to people who don't know their place. Tyler caught the book with a grin and hurled it over the fence into a muddy puddle on the other side. Damon, taking the cue, grabbed Oliver's calculator and did the same. Oliver watched his possessions being destroyed, his muscles tense with the effort of restraint. He'd been training since he was 8 years old, had competed in tournaments across 3 states, had taken down opponents twice his size. These 3 had no idea what he was capable of, but he remembered the look on his parents' faces after the incident at his old school, the disappointment and worry. Violence isn't the answer, his father had said. Your training is about discipline and self-defense, not hurting others. So Oliver stood and endured as the 3 bullies emptied his backpack, destroying what they could and stealing what looked valuable. When they were done, Jackson stepped close again, his face inches from, Oliver's thus Monday morning, $20, or this gets worse. He flicked Oliver's forehead with his finger. Got it, Tubby? Oliver said nothing, which Jackson took as submission. The 3 bullies walked away laughing, high-fiving each other as if they'd accomplished something significant. When they were gone, Oliver knelt and began gathering his scattered belongings. His history textbook was soaked and muddy. His calculator screen was cracked. Several notebooks were torn. As he worked, he felt someone approach and tensed again, ready for more trouble. Are you okay? It was a girl's voice, soft and concerned. Oliver looked up to see a tall girl with dark curly hair pulled back in a ponytail. He vaguely recognized her from his English class but couldn't remember her name. I'm fine, he said automatically, continuing to gather his things. She knelt beside him and began helping. I'm Zoe. We have Ms. Rodriguez's class together. Oliver, he replied, though she probably already knew that. What Jackson and those jerks did was really messed up, Zoe said, handing him a slightly damp notebook. They've been getting worse this year. No one stands up to them. Oliver shrugged. I just want to get through the semester. Zoe looked at him curiously. You know, you don't seem as upset as most people would be. For a moment, Oliver considered, telling her the truth about his years of training, about the competitions, about how he could have put all 3 bullies on the ground in under a minute if he'd wanted to. Instead, he zipped up his now empty backpack. Thanks for helping. I should get home. Zoe nodded, seemingly disappointed by his response. See you Monday, I guess. As Oliver walked home, taking the long route through the neighborhood of large suburban houses with perfectly manicured lawns, his mind was not on the bullies or his ruined schoolwork, but on the small dojo tucked away in a strip mall 10 miles from his new home. Tonight was training night, and for a few hours at least he could be himself again. Master Wong's Mixed Martial Arts Academy was nothing fancy, just a converted storefront with padded floors, some basic equipment, and walls lined with motivational posters and competition medals. But to Oliver, it was sanctuary. Here his size wasn't a liability but an asset. Here his discipline and focus were respected, not mocked. You're distracted today, observed Sifu Wong, a compact man in his 50s, whose kind face belied his formidable fighting skills. They were working on clinch techniques, and Oliver had missed an obvious counter. Sorry, Sifu, school stuff. Master Wong nodded knowingly. The new school is still difficult? Oliver hesitated, then admitted, there are some guys who've been giving me trouble. Huh? Sifu Wong adjusted Oliver's stance and demonstrated the move again. And you remember what we discussed about confrontations outside the ring? Avoid if possible. Diffuse if necessary. Defend only as a last resort. And have you needed to defend yourself? Oliver shook his head. No, Sifu, I've been patient. Master Wong's eyes crinkled with his smile. Patience is good. But remember, Oliver, there is a difference between patience and allowing yourself to be disrespected. Sometimes standing your ground is necessary, not with violence but with confidence. They continued training, and for a while, Oliver was able to lose himself in the familiar rhythms of combat, his body moving with practiced precision. By the end of the session, his mind felt clearer, his burden lighter. As he was leaving, Sifu Wong called out to him, Oliver, I almost forgot. The regional qualifier is in 3 weeks. I've entered you in the under-18 middleweight division. Oliver's heart sank. I can't, Sifu. My parents, I've already spoken with them. Master Wong interrupted with a knowing smile. They agreed that as long as you're staying out of trouble at school, the competition would be good for you, a proper outlet. For the first time in weeks, Oliver felt a surge of genuine excitement. The regional qualifier was the gateway to the state championships, where he'd placed 3rd last year. With another year of training, he had a real shot at first place this time. Thank you, Sifu, he said, bowing deeply. Master Wong returned the bow. Train hard. Channel your frustrations here, in preparation, not in anger, at those who do not understand our way. The weekend passed too quickly. Oliver split his time between training at the dojo, helping his parents with their new restaurant, and trying to salvage his damaged school supplies. By Sunday night, he'd managed to dry out his textbook and replace his calculator. Though the latter had taken most of his savings, the thought of facing Jackson's demand for $20 on Monday morning hung over him like a storm cloud. Monday arrived cold and drizzly, matching Oliver's mood perfectly. He considered pretending to be sick, but knew it would only delay the inevitable. Better to face it head-on. He arrived at school early, hoping to avoid an immediate confrontation, and headed straight for his first period class. The halls were relatively empty, with just a few early arrivers clustered around lockers or hurrying to finish homework. Oliver made it to Mr. Wilson's history class without incident and slid into his seat at the back of the room. As students began filing in, Oliver kept his eyes on his desk, methodically arranging his pens and notebook. A shadow fell across his desk, and he looked up expecting Jackson or one of his cronies. It was Zoe from Friday, her curly hair damp from the rain. Hey, she said, sliding into the empty desk beside his. How was your weekend? Oliver blinked in surprise. Besides that brief interaction at the bike racks, no one at Westlake had voluntarily spoken to him. It was okay, thanks. Zoe seemed about to say more when the classroom door opened again, and Jackson sauntered in with Tyler in tow. Their eyes immediately locked onto Oliver, and Jackson made a show of patting his pocket, a reminder of the money he expected. Oliver felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't brought any money, having spent his last dollars on the new calculator. He'd made a decision over the weekend. He wouldn't pay, wouldn't do their homework, wouldn't become their servant. If that meant another confrontation, so be it. He'd find a way to handle it without breaking his promise to his parents. Throughout the morning, Oliver could feel Jackson's eyes on him, watching and waiting. In the hallways between classes, he caught glimpses of Damon or Tyler, clearly keeping tabs on him. By lunchtime, the tension had built to the point where Oliver found himself breathing in the controlled pattern Sifu Wong had taught him for managing pre-fight nerves. He entered the cafeteria warily, scanning for threats. Jackson, and his crew were at their usual table near the center of the room, holding court among their admirers. Oliver kept his head down and found an empty table in the corner, unpacking his homemade lunch, a simple rice bowl with vegetables and chicken his mother had prepared. He'd just taken his first bite when a shadow fell across his table. Looking up, he found not Jackson but Zoe holding a lunch tray. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, already setting down her tray. Before Oliver could respond, another girl appeared beside her, petite, with short-cropped hair dyed purple at the tips. "This is Mia," Zoe introduced. "She's in our English class too." Oliver nodded awkwardly as both girls sat down. Hi. Zoe told me about what happened Friday," Mia said bluntly, unwrapping a sandwich. "Jackson's crew are total jerks. They've been worse since Coach Matthews made Jackson team captain." Oliver shrugged uncomfortably, not sure why these girls had suddenly decided to befriend him. From across the cafeteria, he could feel Jackson watching, and the attention from Zoe and Mia was only making him more of a target. "You don't talk much, do you?" Mia observed, taking a bite of her sandwich. "Leave him alone, Mia," Zoe said. "He's probably just not used to your particular brand of friendliness yet." Despite his anxiety about Jackson, Oliver found himself almost smiling at their banter. It had been weeks since he'd had a normal social interaction at school. The moment was short-lived. Oliver sensed movement behind him seconds before Jackson's voice boomed over his shoulder. "Making friends, Chen. How cute." Jackson placed his hands on the table, leaning down to eye level with Oliver. Damon and Tyler flanked him like bodyguards. "Did you forget our arrangement?" Oliver met Jackson's gaze steadily. "I don't have any money for you." The cafeteria seemed to grow quieter as nearby students tuned in to the developing drama. Jackson's face hardened. "Wrong answer," he said, softly. "Maybe you need another lesson in respect." "Leave him alone, Jackson," Zoe interjected, her voice stronger than Oliver expected. Jackson's attention shifted to her, his expression darkening further. "Stay out of this, Zoe. This is between me and the new kid." "It's fine," Oliver said to Zoe quietly. "I can handle this." Something in his tone must have surprised her, because Zoe's eyebrows rose slightly. Jackson, however, laughed. "You hear that? Tubby thinks he can handle this." He made air quotes with his fingers. "Let's find out. Behind the gym, after school." He straightened up, towering over the seated Oliver. "Unless you're going to run to a teacher like a little baby?" Oliver looked up at him calmly. "I'll be there." Jackson seemed momentarily taken aback by Oliver's composure, but recovered quickly. "Good. Bring the $20 or things will get ugly." With that, he and his friends moved off, high-fiving each other as if they'd won some great victory. "Are you crazy?" Mia hissed once they were out of earshot. "Jackson will destroy you. He put a kid in the hospital last year, broke his nose and gave him a concussion." Oliver continued eating his lunch, his movements deliberate and precise. "I'll be fine." Zoe studied him curiously. "You know, for someone being threatened with a beating, you seem pretty calm." Oliver just shrugged, not trusting himself to explain. The truth was, a part of him, a part he wasn't proud of, was almost looking forward to the confrontation. 3 weeks of enduring humiliation and threats, of holding back, of being less than he was, it had taken a toll. The upcoming tournament provided some outlet, but the daily reality of Westlake was becoming unbearable. "This ends today one way or another," he thought, finishing his lunch in silence while Zoe and Mia exchanged worried glances. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anticipation. In each class, Oliver found himself counting the minutes, mentally preparing for what was to come. He wasn't afraid of Jackson or his friends. He'd faced more skilled opponents in tournaments. What concerned him was finding the balance, standing up for himself, without crossing the line into the kind of violence that had gotten him in trouble before. By the time the final bell rang, word had spread throughout the school about the impending showdown. As Oliver made his way to his locker, he noticed students watching him, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. No one expected him to win. No one knew what he was capable of. At his locker, he found Zoe waiting for him, her face etched with concern. "You don't have to do this, you know. We could go to Principal Edwards." "And say what?" Oliver asked, exchanging books in his backpack. "That Jackson challenged me to a fight. I'd be labeled a snitch on top of everything else. Besides, this isn't just about today. It's about every day after this." Zoe placed a hand on his arm. "At least let me and Mia come with you, as witnesses." Oliver hesitated, then nodded. Having witnesses might actually help keep things from escalating too far. The area behind the gym was a secluded patch of grass, bordered by the school's chain-link fence on one side and a row of scraggly trees on the other. It was the unofficial fighting ground of Westlake High, far enough from the main buildings to avoid immediate teacher intervention, but still on school property. When Oliver arrived with Zoe and Mia, a small crowd had already gathered. Word traveled fast in high school. Jackson stood in the center of the makeshift arena, Damon and Tyler beside him, looking like they were about to enjoy a show. Other students formed a loose circle around them, voices hushed with anticipation. "He actually showed up," Tyler commented as Oliver approached, sounding almost impressed. Jackson stepped forward, cracking his knuckles theatrically. "Last chance, Jen. $20 and an apology, and maybe I'll only rough you up a little." Oliver set his backpack down carefully and met Jackson's gaze. "No." A murmur ran through the crowd. No one said no to Jackson Miller, especially not the quiet new kid who'd spent weeks avoiding confrontation. Jackson's face darkened with anger. "Your funeral." He lunged forward suddenly, aiming a heavy punch at Oliver's face. To everyone's surprise, Jackson's most of all, Oliver wasn't there when the punch arrived. With a subtle shift of his weight, he had moved just enough for Jackson's fist to pass harmlessly by his cheek. The momentum carried Jackson forward, off balance, and Oliver simply stepped aside, making no move to counter. Confusion flashed across Jackson's face, quickly replaced by rage. He turned and charged again, throwing a wild haymaker. Again, Oliver slipped the punch with minimal movement, his face calm, almost detached. "Stop dancing and fight," Jackson snarled, frustration evident in his voice. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, the expected beating not materializing. Instead, they were witnessing something puzzling. The new kid, seemingly untouchable, making the school's most feared bully look clumsy and amateurish. "I don't want to fight you, Jackson," Oliver said quietly. "I just want to be left alone." "Scared?" Jackson taunted, circling now, more cautious after his failed attacks. "No," Oliver replied simply, "just giving you a chance to walk away." Jackson's face contorted with fury. This time, he feinted a punch before attempting to tackle Oliver to the ground, a move that might have worked on an untrained opponent. But Oliver had been grappling since he was 10. As Jackson charged, Oliver executed a perfect hip toss, using Jackson's own momentum to send him flying. The larger boy landed hard on his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs with an audible whoosh. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. No one had ever seen Jackson Miller taken down so effortlessly. Before Jackson could recover, Damon charged forward with a roar, swinging wildly. Oliver ducked under the big teen's arm and delivered. A precise palm strike to his solar plexus, just enough force to stun, not to damage. Damon doubled over, gasping for breath. Tyler, seeing both his friends neutralized in seconds, hesitated. When Oliver turned to look at him, he backed away, hands raised in surrender. Jackson was on his feet again, though he was moving gingerly, one hand pressed to his lower back where he'd landed. His face was a mask of humiliation and rage. "What the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Some kind of freak?" Oliver stood relaxed but ready, his stance balanced and centered. "I'm a junior regional MMA champion with a black belt in karate and 3 years of Brazilian jiu-jitsu training," he said calmly, "and I'm tired of pretending to be less than I am just to avoid trouble." The crowd erupted in exclamations and whispers. Phones were out now, recording the unexpected turn of events. "You've been faking this whole time?" Jackson's voice rose in disbelief. "Making us think you were some weak, pathetic loser." "I never wanted trouble," Oliver replied. "My parents made me promise not to fight after an incident at my old school. I was trying to keep that promise." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "So what changed? Why fight now?" Oliver looked around at the gathered students, at Zoe and Mia watching with wide eyes, at the school building where he'd endured weeks of humiliation. "Because sometimes standing your ground is necessary," he said, echoing Sifu Wong's words. "Not with violence, but with confidence." He turned his attention back to Jackson. "We don't need to be enemies, but the bullying stops now. Not just of me, but everyone." For a moment, it seemed like Jackson might attack again. His pride, too, wounded to accept defeat. But something in Oliver's stance, in the calm certainty with which he held himself, must have communicated the futility of continued aggression. Jackson slowly lowered his hands. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It can be," Oliver replied. "Your choice." The crowd began to disperse as it became clear the show was over. As students left, many glanced back at Oliver with newfound respect or curiosity. The story of what had happened would be all over school by morning, Oliver knew, his secret exposed for better or worse. Zoe approached him, her expression a mix of shock and admiration. "That was not what I expected," Oliver shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I should have handled it differently. Sifu Wang would say I used my skills to embarrass him, not just to defend myself. You're what now? Mia asked, joining them. My teacher, Oliver explained, at the dojo where I train. So you're actually some kind of karate kid? Mia grinned. That's way cooler than being the quiet new guy. Oliver couldn't help but smile. A little. It's a bit more complicated than that, but yeah, I guess so. As they walked back toward the main building, Oliver spotted a familiar figure waiting by the gym doors. Sifu Wang, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Oh, Oliver murmured. My teacher's here. Zoe and Mia followed his gaze. Is that bad? Zoe asked. Depends on what he heard, Oliver replied, his stomach tightening. Had he just broken his promise? Would his parents pull him from the tournament now? He approached Master Wang with his head slightly bowed, prepared for disapproval. Sifu, I can explain. Master Wang held up a hand. Principal Edwards called me. Apparently, there was concern about a fight. His eyes bore into Oliver's. Was there a fight, Oliver? Oliver swallowed. No, Sifu, there was a challenge, but no one was hurt. Master Wang studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Good. You controlled the situation without causing harm. Yes, Sifu, just like you taught me. A small smile tugged at the corner of Master Wang's mouth. Then it seems the lesson was learned. By more than one student today, I think. He glanced past Oliver to where Jackson and his friends were skulking away. Come, I will drive you home. Your parents will want to hear about this, from both of us. Oliver nodded, then turned to Zoe and Mia. I have to go, but thanks for standing by me. Zoe smiled warmly. See you tomorrow. For the first time since arriving at Westlake, Oliver found himself looking forward to returning to school. Yeah, see you tomorrow. That evening, with Sifu Wang's help, Oliver explained everything to his parents. The weeks of bullying he'd endured, his efforts to avoid confrontation, and finally, the showdown that had ended without anyone getting hurt. To his surprise, his parents weren't angry. Concerned, yes, but also proud that he'd found a way to stand up for himself without resorting to harmful violence. The tournament is still on, his father assured him, as long as you continue to show such wisdom. The next day at school, everything was different. As Oliver walked through the halls, students who had previously ignored him now nodded in greeting or looked at him with newfound respect. In the cafeteria, Zoe and Mia waved him over to their table, where he found himself welcomed into their circle of friends, artists, band kids, and debate team members who accepted him without question. Jackson and his crew kept their distance. Once, in the hallway, Oliver caught Jackson watching him with an unreadable expression. When their eyes met, Jackson gave a small grudging nod. Not friendship, but perhaps the beginning of respect. 3 weeks later, Oliver stood on the first-place podium at the regional MMA tournament, gold medal around his neck, his parents and Sifu Wang beaming with pride. In the audience, he spotted Zoe, Mia, and several other friends from Westlake who had come to cheer him on. Even more surprising was the sight of Jackson standing at the back of the gym, watching with what might have been admiration. As Oliver held up his medal for photos, he reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. He had come to Westlake hiding who he truly was, afraid that his strength would get him into trouble. Instead, he had learned that true strength wasn't about physical prowess or fighting ability, but about having the courage to be authentically yourself and the wisdom to use your power responsibly. The bullies had indeed picked on the wrong kid. But in the end, the lesson wasn't about vengeance or humiliation. It was about finding the balance between standing your ground and extending a hand, about being strong enough to defend yourself and compassionate enough to offer second chances. As Oliver stepped down from the podium, surrounded by his growing circle of friends and supporters, he knew that he had found his place at Westlake High at last. Not as a victim, not as a bully slayer, but simply as himself, Oliver Chen, in all his complexity and strength. Well, now I want to know, what's your opinion about this story? Leave a comment, we'd love to hear from you, and tell us which city you watched this video from. And it's not over yet. There's another powerful story playing on your screen right now. Click on it. I'm waiting for you.